Welcome to Empowering Seniors. I'm your host, Katherine Ambrose. Today we're talking about substance abuse disorder, and I have a very special guest with a very special story. Peter Ninemeyer is here today. He's a local social worker who has a mission that's so inspiring, and he's going to talk to us about the multi-generational impact about substance abuse. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Well, thank you for having me, Katherine. It's really an honor to be here.
Let's share a little bit about some of the trouble you've caused. The trouble you've caused.
Well, it's hard to encapsulate, but anyhow, I'll do my best.
Okay.
But yeah, I really do come by my work honestly. I grew up in rural northwestern Kansas, about 25 miles from Norton. It's called Coffin Rock Ranch, and it was like the late 60s, early 70s, and it was a lot of protest. There was just a lot of dissension in our country then, and I was part of all that, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, okay?
Mm-hmm.
It was mostly the latter, but it was a lot of, I was really bound and determined to try marijuana. That was the big thing, and I did the first few times it grew on the farm, but it didn't do nothing for me, so there's gotta be more to it than that. Mm-hmm. So sure enough, there was. A guy came back from Vietnam, he had some Nam weed, and I smoked some of that, and I went, wow, I'm not gonna get mad at Dad anymore, I'm just gonna get stoned. Mm-hmm. And little did I know that I really that was like a goal of emotional dependence on this, which I later developed. But anyhow, I remember around that same time, I had this conversation, Dr. E.F. Steichen, who ultimately helped found Valley Hope in Norton, Kansas, was talking with my father, and he was telling Dad about how, Ray, addiction is a disease. And if we don't start changing the way we're doing this today, we're gonna have a nightmare beyond that the prohibition will pale in comparison to. And he said, the AMA has, designated this as a disease in 1955, and addiction truly is a disease.
And how old were you when you heard that conversation?
14 years old, around the same time I smoked pot, and I was like, I don't want to say nothing today, I was a little bit uncomfortable, but I never forgot that conversation.
Interesting that you heard that conversation. It has had an impact on you, but it didn't prevent you from going down your own path of addiction.
Great point. No, what happened was I started using it then. I kept using it more throughout high school. I got out of high school. I became a DJ, and that was a lot of rock and roll and drugs. Mm-hmm. And anyhow, so my father came down with cancer when I was 22 years old. And he ultimately passed from that. But before that, about 3 years before that, my brother, my oldest brother's a priest, and my second oldest brother was a person that had really severe mental illness, and he took his life when I was a senior in high school. And my dad never forgave himself for that. So 3 years later, I often wonder if that didn't contribute to his early demise, but he got cancer and died. And that's when the reins really came off a wild horse. Mm-hmm. So I met a guy in Hays, Kansas, and he was next door neighbor to a farmer that grew 1,700 pounds of marijuana in an attempt to save his farm that the bank wouldn't loan him the money for. So that turned me into a drug dealer. Mm-hmm. I know it's an unfriendly term, but I'm just being very real about it. And so 2.5 years later, I got busted with 100 pounds of marijuana. And at that time, the probation officer, I thought I was through smoking marijuana. I mean, everybody's like, Father Carey, okay, we're done, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thought I was, but it was really hard to quit smoking marijuana, especially when you aren't having to give any UAs. Mm-hmm. So what I did instead was got somebody else to work the job I had, and I kept growing marijuana, even while I was on probation. So a year later, I never quit. I got off probation, and 5 years later, I got busted again in eastern Kansas. And this time I was 1,800 transplants, so I got a 4 to 10 year sentence in the state of Kansas, and I really had captured myself in a prison I couldn't get out of and was starting to hate. So I was trying to do this big time, and that all ended on August 15th, 1989, when the feds, I got busted and it became a federal case, and I was looking at doing 24.5 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at a couple of really desperate means, which one was becoming a fugitive, the other was going to prison for 25 years or most, if not all the rest of my life. So I made the decision to become a fugitive.
You've lived life, I'm telling you. So
hey, I'm just giving you some of the lowlights or highlights, but that's just the start of it, trust me.
So Before you became a fugitive, as you were making, what caused you to make that decision? And did you tell anybody?
I don't want to implicate anybody, right? Okay, but I told one person that's very close to me, and I was there with the family, and I have pictures of the night before I left on the run, and I was faking a smile. But I told a couple of very close friends, and it was really heartbreaking. It was like I was never going to see my mother, family, and everything I've been through in my life. Nothing was as heartbreaking and horrible as being a fugitive, and never.
And how long were you a fugitive?
15 months before I got rescued in Miami, Florida, extradited to Kansas, got caught trying to break out of a jail here, and ended up at the U.S. Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas, and ultimately began serving that 27-year sentence in FCI Englewood in Littleton, Colorado.
Yeah, truly a wild horse.
Yeah.
Truly a wild horse. And so, but they rescued you by arresting you.
And the wild horse began to get tamed at that prison in Colorado.
Okay.
And I joined this group called Families Against Mandatory Minimums that advocated for changing these mandatory minimum sentences. But that also grew into a prison youth counseling program called Jericho Road. And that program, Katherine, changed my life and is really part of the work I do today.
That's amazing.
At the Caring Center of Wichita.
And so how long were you in the prison in Colorado?
So I was there for 10 years, and toward the end of that, a friend of mine suggested that President Clinton was going to commute some sentences. He said he did inhale, and he is going to commute some sentences. And thank God I applied for that, and on the greatest day of my life, January 20th, 2001, I got a presidential commutation of sentence from Bill Clinton, and I became a free man. And 2 years later, I had the unmitigated honor of thanking him for giving me my life back.
You've done a lot with that life. So what have you done since?
Well, I got my degree in social work, and I did a lot of work in that. And along the way, when I was doing that, I kept hearing people, and I was working with kids and just, addiction. And I kept hearing everybody say, well, addiction is a disease, and nobody ever told me the how and why of that. So I ultimately went to a conference in Birmingham, Alabama, that was in 2006, that was significantly held there to correlate the discrimination, racial discrimination before and beyond that, with addiction. And the fact that we were treating this as a public safety criminal justice problem and not the public health problem it is, because it is disease. Addiction is a disease that disrupts critical brain structures that control judgment, decision making, and behavior. And Katherine, might surprise you, but the last time I smoked marijuana, I was in federal prison, and I actually got high that 5th time I tried it and all that time. And it was a dysphoric, not euphoric experience, because I sat there in that fragmented, stone state of mind and just looked at my life and how a kid from a good family in northwestern Kansas had destroyed his life, right? And I had more shame and guilt than I could muster. And when I started getting this knowledge and information in Birmingham, I began to understand it wasn't what was wrong with me, it was what happened to me in terms of that disrupt of critical brain structures. So I came back to Kansas, and I've been doing PowerPoint slideshows. I've been doing whatever. My whole mission in life is help people understand addiction as a disease.
So for parents or grandparents that might be watching that are struggling with a family member, or maybe more than one family member that's dealing with these issues, what would be your word of encouragement or calm to them?
Okay, I want to say, number one, it's not a choice. Once people start using a little bit, the science is pretty easy, okay? People use drugs to alleviate bad feelings because it gives them a sense of well-being. Feels great, so they use too much too often, and the brain changes until it becomes normal with the substance present. Now, people think, well, I'm going to stop this, or the loved one thinks, well, look what you're doing to your family, look at what you're doing to all of us, surely, and the patient, and they are a patient, that's a medical patient, this is a disease, and they believe they're going to change, right? And they can, even though there's no evidence to support that. And the loved one, they think, well, I would, I could, I will, and so we need to understand that they need to get help, right? So let's just throw this out to you, Katherine. 22 million people in this country have substance use disorder. Only, I would ask you to guess, but I'll just tell you, because you'll miss, like everybody does, only 1 million of those 22 million, or 5%, are getting help for a disease that kills more people every year in this country than car wrecks or gun violence. So we need to get people we need to see professionals and help them get intervention because treatment counteracts addiction's powerful disruptive effect on brain and behavior and helps them regain control of their lives and get back in touch, with their family and live the unbelievably rewarding life I and most of all of us get to live.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think about, you had a successful marijuana business. You could maybe argue that you were growing it, selling in California. Now it's legal in some of these same states you were working in. What do you think about that? What do you think about the easy access that people have today? And has marijuana changed in its potency over time?
Okay, number one, I think that most people are misguided by their own experience with marijuana, including me, because I'm very aversive to it. Mm-hmm. And it really does change brain and behavior. And the marijuana today is 20% in the flower form. It was 4% when I was, okay? Well, I went to a presentation at Harvard some years ago. It was great what I learned, but not all, because over the 20 years I used it, it was estimated that I lost about 9 IQ points. So that's why college algebra was tough, I would say.
Yeah.
But anyhow, but anyhow, so the concentrated forms are 90%, and kids today are developing psychosis, and not to mention what it does with their whole, the transcendence into the gateway drug with other drugs, but also the trajectory of their life. But anyhow, the 3 myths about marijuana are that it's not addictive, there's no withdrawal, and that it's not harmful for some people. Okay, now I see a lot of people for mental health, and I want to touch on that real quickly in a little bit, okay? But let's throw it into there. A lot of people have depression, they have anxiety, and all of these things, and bipolar, and all this stuff correlates with a person's use of the substance, or the use of the substance creates the anxiety and the depression, okay? So there's a strong correlation there. So we use psychotropic medications and other medications to help people, okay? So anyhow, out of that, the same time, I think medical marijuana, we should look at all these drugs as what is the efficacy and what are the side effects. I know people that use the gummies to help sleep that can't sleep otherwise, right? It's much better to me than using Xanax, right? Okay, but I think that it needs to be viewed in that perspective. But I'm not a big fan of recreational marijuana. I think we should take money from that and put it into educating people about the real effects of it. And that's what we should be doing in our school system as well.
Because recreational marijuana, for some people, it can lower their IQ. What are some of the other things that it might do?
Oh God, it consumes their life. It just becomes a primary motivating force of their life that's actually very demotivating. I was saying to a kid in group one time, I said, man, have you ever got stoned, and you just had these really great ideas and you were going to do this and that, but you never really did. He said, yeah, man, them's pipe dreams. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much it, right? No, it's just follow through, right? And then a dependency on that substance. And nowadays, the withdrawal symptoms of it are comparable to nicotine, which people wouldn't believe, except for the physical withdrawal aspect of it. So I'm not a big fan, but I don't really believe in the criminalization of it either. We need to have an educational approach to all of this.
And what do you think about family members that are doing their best to inspire or uplift or change people or support them where things are falling apart? What kind of multi-generational impacts do you sometimes see?
Well, we just see, like I have a person that's 80 years old come, he's got a 50-year-old son, and he's trying to do whatever, and I talk to him about setting boundaries, but the earlier that we can set boundaries that have a consequence, look, if you're going to be living in this house, which a woman did, she was in her 50s, but her son, 30-year-old, she's probably about 60, her 30-year-old son actually was drinking every day, had no idea that he was actually going to go into massive withdrawal when he quit drinking and end up in the hospital for 11 days. But anyhow, that person is part of my group, and he's got 9 months of recovery now, okay? And he's changed his life forever. But she came and saw me, we got a strategy in place, and that's what you have to do. Reach out to a professional. Also, you could go to Al-Anon, go to other support meetings, but we have to quit believing that people are going to just get better, and we have to quit believing that it's just a choice, okay? It's their choice. Just say no is magical thinking. This is a biologically, physiologically, psychologically and socially chemically induced brain disorder that takes anywhere from 1 year to 24 months and a little beyond for the brain to reconfigure. We have CAT scans that show that today, but it's a change in lifestyle. And just think of somebody, if you have religion, you're very much connected to your faith, and somebody tells you, hey, you're kind of misguided here. You need to just stop. Why don't you just stop? This is the wrong direction, and your beliefs are wrong. Well, people develop this whole belief system because they have this induced brain disorder that's empowering their behaviors.
So in your family produced a convict and a priest. So that's really interesting. How did your family impact you, and especially when you were in prison or coming out? What kind of impact did your family have in supporting you?
That's an awesome question. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my family. You know, they were there with me through all this. I also have a core group of friends that stood with me through all this. And the work ethic and everything I learned, my values when I was in, growing up on a farm in northwestern Kansas, those stood out and made me excel. And actually, I think led to me being one of the, what I did in prison was I got a life, right? And I decided that I would, and I got into Buddhism when I was in there, and I decided, what the Buddha said about we are the sole creators of our own suffering. So I'm like, I can either accept that I'm going to be in here for most, if not all the rest of my life, or I can fight every day. But my family was always there, and they gave me all these goals. And just to end that too, I mentioned Dr. Steichen, he was my great uncle. Well, my Aunt Tucky, my mother died unexpectedly 4 months before I was to leave prison.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
And 4 months later, I was on the phone with my brother, Father Carey. I said that right. I'm free, I'm free. And that was the whole depths of the human experience, from one end to the other. But we got out, Father Carey and I went on what we called the Freedom Tour around the state, and we ended with my Aunt Tucky in Lenora, Kansas. And she took me out to the foyer before that, and she had raised 11 kids, put all of them through college on meager funds. And she looked me in the face and said, Peter, to whom much is given, much is expected. We'll be expecting to hear some great things out of you. You go make your mother proud. And kind of been a driving force.
It's an amazing story.
Thank you.
Now let's meet Tanner Leopold. Tanner, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
How has working with a professional helped you in your journey?
So my journey is quite an extensive one. It started about the time I was 18. I was getting out of high school, kind of experimenting things and everything, and kind of my life took a turn for the worst. Decided to move towards Iowa to try and get away from the problem. I had family up there, grandparents, aunts, uncles, all that, thinking I had a great basis up there to kind of get my life back on track. Well, little did I know, without getting the professional help or anything like that, the problem will follow you up to where you were. So I was in Iowa, I ended up going through some struggles and everything. I lost my job, I lost where I was living with my cousin, and ended up actually having to move in with my grandmother on her farm in Iowa, and brought a lot of problems into her life that probably shouldn't have been brought into for about a month or so. Wasn't the closest with my grandmother growing up, but during that month we became really close, and it was definitely an eye-opener for her to come and confront me in the situation. That was one of the biggest things, that it's not necessarily that she understood what was going on, but she definitely knew there was something in the works that was leading up to a big blow-up. So during my time in that month, the way the chemicals and everything were working in my brain, I did a lot of things to tear the trust off from her. I ended up stealing money from her, and it turned into where she contacted my dad and said he needs the professional help. We need to get him out of here. And so my dad came up, gave me the choice. You can stay here in Iowa by yourself. Your grandmother's done. Our family in Kansas is done, and you can live that life, or you can come back and get the professional help that you need and live a life of success. And we are here to support you. Your grandmother will support you and everything. So one thing I will say is definitely bringing it to the forefront. Bring that intervention into someone. If you know someone that's going through it, find that professional. Get a second opinion before you just confront it. Maybe understand it a little bit. Get an idea of how the process works, and then bring the intervention up. I would say trying to understand the addiction is probably one of the hardest things that people on the outside have understanding. But If you talk to a professional, if you get the right things in balance, you can move to the right direction to work on it as a family. I mean, multi-generational is something that is big with this. You've got my grandfather who has an alcohol dependence. I've got uncles that have gone in and out of AA, have alcohol dependence. Mine started at 18, and it was a choice that I wish I didn't make. It's wizened me up a little bit. It's brought awareness to a lot of stuff, but it's a disease that is passed on through generation. Once it starts, the choices in your brain definitely start taking a turn towards not the way you were raised and everything like that. Mm-hmm. So getting a lasso on that situation and bringing it all back into a family intervention, whether it's, like I said, grandmother, father, putting it all into perspective of the person that's using and bringing them back down to earth and saying, hey, this isn't the life we want to see you live. We want to see you succeed. And I'm forever thankful for that moment of them bringing me back to Wichita. I mean, I've ran into a few problems since, but my life has definitely turned for a better sense. I mean, I've got a house, got a dog, wife, baby. I mean, with a life of sobriety, it's definitely, the peaks are way higher than being 30, 40, living with your parents, but it's the stigma behind addiction is probably what's wrong with a lot of the forefront of heading on the addiction as you try to figure out how to take your next steps of say the right thing and do the right thing. That's the biggest thing. Did you feel trapped by your grandmother and your dad when they pushed that? There's a sense, yes, but with me, as I knew it wasn't the life I wanted. Okay. It was just something I could not change. It was something I could not kick. That my brain functioning had changed so much because of the chemicals I had put in. There was nothing I could do. I was powerless. So you trusted them. Yes. In their opinion that you needed that intervention. Yes, 100%. I bet they're proud of you now. Definitely. And so, unfortunately, that grandmother was not able to actually witness my wedding last year in October. Mm-hmm. She passed the week after, unfortunately. She was alive, and we talked to her and everything, but after that, so the success, I wish she could have seen that day. It would have added a little more. I wish she could have seen my son be born. It could have added a little more to the story, but I definitely know that she's up there looking down and thinking, okay, I did the right thing by confronting him. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm glad she did. Yep. And I'm glad you took their advice and you plugged in like you did. So congratulations. Thank you very much. And there's a lot of different routes that you can take to confront this, and mine was actually in a pasture next to a red barn in the middle of Iowa. So I mean, there is hundreds of different places that this could happen. It could be in a controlled setting. It could be in just kind of, like I say, in a pasture in the middle of a field, because I was so far out there that I walked away from the original confrontation, but they wrangled me in and got me talking. And their love was strong enough to make that happen. Yes, definitely. That's amazing. Yep. Thank you, Tanner. Thanks for being on the show. And now let's get back to Peter. Peter, thank you so much for bringing Tanner here today and for sharing your amazing story. And I know it's been a blessing for our audience, and thank you so much for being on Empowering Seniors.
It was truly my honor and pleasure, and thank you.
And thank you for tuning in. All of us here at the station hope that if you have challenges in your life, that this story has touched, that you reach out to us. We have resources. Our number is 316-686-4500, or you can email us at empoweringseniors@kpts.org. I'm your host, Katherine Ambrose, and I'll see you next time on Empowering Seniors.